General Hospital will reveal Sidwell's invitation was anything but a mere request. It carried the weight of an unspoken command, a veiled summons that left Alexis little room for refusal. Her instinctive reaction was to reject it outright, her voice sharp with defiance. She wanted no part in whatever scheme he was orchestrating at Wyndemere. Yet, as the words left her lips, a strange unease settled deep within her. There was something in Sidwell's tone, something deliberate, measured, too controlled, too expectant. It was as though he already knew she would come, as though the decision had been made for her before she even realized it. That night, sleep eluded Alexis as she pored over the invitation, her thoughts a chaotic storm of speculation. It wasn't just the demand that unsettled her, it was the timing. Why now? Why insist on Wyndemere, a place steeped in the ghosts of her family's past? She had spent years distancing herself from the Cassadines, severing every tie that bound her to their legacy of power, deception, and ruin. And yet, despite her efforts, despite all her logical reasoning, there was a nagging pull in the back of her mind that told her this was not something she could simply ignore. Then, just before dawn, a package arrived at her office, left anonymously. Inside was an old photograph, grainy, aged with time. It showed Sidwell standing beside a man she had never seen before, a man with striking Cassadine features. Her breath caught in her throat as she studied the image. The resemblance was unmistakable. Every Cassadine bore an imprint of that family's dark, aristocratic lineage, and this man was no exception. The air of mystery surrounding him sent a chill down her spine. Who was he? Why had she never heard of him? 1,000 questions raced through her mind, and for the first time, doubt took root. Had she truly uncovered all there was to know about her lineage, or had she merely accepted the version of history that had been fed to her? The thought gnawed at her, unraveling years of certainty. The Cassadines were masters of secrets, of manipulation, of rewriting the past to suit their own ends. What if she, too, had been a victim of that carefully constructed narrative? What if Sidwell's invitation was not merely an elaborate ploy, but the opening to a truth long buried? By the time the sun rose, her decision was made. She would go. Steeling herself, Alexis arrived at Spoon Island as the ferry cut through the mist-shrouded waters. The sight of Wyndemere looming on the cliffside sent a shiver through her. Once a grand symbol of Cassadine dominance, it now stood as something else entirely, an empire that had changed hands, a relic of power waiting to be redefined. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as though the very walls of the estate were whispering forgotten secrets. As she stepped inside, her heels echoing against the marble floors, she sensed a shift in the air. Something was different. The corridors were darker, the silence more pronounced. Sidwell had not merely taken possession of the Cassadine estate, he had transformed it, molded it into something new, something distinctly his. He was waiting for her in the grand hall, his silhouette cast long by the glow of the fireplace. The flickering flames illuminated the sharp angles of his face, his expression unreadable yet brimming with purpose. He did not offer pleasantries, nor did he ease her into what he was about to say. Instead, he delivered it with the precision of a blade to the heart. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Alexis felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She wanted to scoff, to call it a lie, to walk away and never look back. But then she remembered the photograph. The undeniable resemblance. The gnawing doubt that had been growing within her. Sidwell watched her intently, his gaze unwavering, as though waiting for the storm of realization to settle within her. And in that moment, she knew. No matter how much she wanted to deny it, no matter how much she wished it wasn't true, this revelation would change everything. The world seemed to tilt beneath Alexis's feet, her very reality cracking under the weight of Sidwell's revelation. She had spent a lifetime unraveling family secrets, enduring betrayals, and surviving the treacherous web of Cassadine lies, but nothing had prepared her for this. Sidwell's words echoed in her mind, refusing to be dismissed as another manipulative ploy. He was her brother. A lost piece of the Cassadine legacy, one they had erased, one they had cast aside. And now, he had returned not just to claim his place, but to burn everything to the ground and build something new from the ashes. She struggled to process the enormity of it, but Sidwell didn't allow her the luxury of hesitation. His voice, smooth yet laced with steel, cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. He laid his intentions bare, stripping away any pretense of diplomacy. His goal was simple, ruthless, and absolute, to eliminate every last remaining Cassadine and seize control of Port Charles. There would be no more compromises, no more hidden alliances, no more relics of the past poisoning the future. He would tear down the corrupted dynasty that had failed them both and construct a new order, one ruled by him, by them, untainted by weakness. The firelight flickered across his face as he took a step closer, his presence dark and commanding. His eyes burned with a terrifying certainty, an unshakable conviction that chilled Alexis to her core. This wasn't mere ambition, this was vengeance, forged over years of resentment and betrayal. He had been forgotten, discarded, treated as if he had never existed. And now, he would make them remember him, in the most brutal way possible. Alexis could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, an inescapable force drawing her into his orbit. There was something terrifyingly methodical in the way he spoke, as if every move had already been calculated, every obstacle already anticipated. He wasn't simply proposing a coup, he was orchestrating a reckoning. And he wanted her by his side. For the first time, Alexis wasn't sure where she stood. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to walk away, to reject the darkness Sidwell was offering. Yet, beneath the horror, beneath the instinct to resist, there was something else, something cold and undeniable. A part of her understood. A part of her recognized the appeal of wiping the slate clean, of dismantling the decaying foundation of the Cassadine legacy and rebuilding it from nothing. Sidwell was right about one thing, their family had been rotting from the inside for decades. It was a dynasty built on greed, manipulation, and power plays that had long lost their purpose. She had fought so hard to distance herself from it, to define herself outside of the Cassadine name. But had that truly freed her? Or had she simply remained a bystander, watching as the cycle of destruction repeated itself? She exhaled slowly, her mind racing through the implications. If she stood against Sidwell, she would become an enemy. And Sidwell was not the kind of man who left enemies breathing. But if she aligned with him, if she played along, if she found a way to control him rather than be controlled, perhaps she could shape the future in ways she never could before. Sidwell watched her intently, waiting for her answer. The flickering fire cast long shadows across the room, making the moment feel like something out of a nightmare, or perhaps, the beginning of a new empire. Alexis lifted her gaze, meeting his with unwavering steadiness. Alexis felt as if the ground beneath her had shattered, leaving her suspended in a reality that no longer made sense. The weight of Sidwell's revelation pressed down on her, suffocating, inescapable. She had spent her entire life uncovering the dark secrets of her family, peeling back layer after layer of deception, yet nothing had prepared her for this. Sidwell was her brother. The very idea was unthinkable, but the proof had been laid before her in undeniable clarity. The DNA test had confirmed what her instincts refused to accept. Yet, the true horror did not come from this revelation alone. Sidwell had not sought her out for reunion or reconciliation. He was not here to reclaim a place within the family he had been cast out from. He had returned with a singular purpose, destruction. He had spent years in the shadows, watching, waiting, planning. And now, with the pieces in place, he was ready to strike. The Cassadines would fall, their legacy wiped from existence, and from the ruins, he would build a new empire, one ruled by him, one built on power, control, and absolute dominance. The fire flickered, casting jagged shadows along the walls of Wyndemere, reflecting the storm raging within Alexis. The familiar grandeur of the estate now felt suffocating, the weight of its history pressing down on her like an iron shroud. Sidwell stood before her, a figure of calculated precision, his presence commanding and inescapable. His every word was measured, his every movement deliberate. There was no hesitation in his voice, no uncertainty in his gaze. He spoke of the Cassadines as though they were nothing more than a relic of failure, a decaying monument to greed and corruption. They had ruled with manipulation and deceit, but their time had passed. It was time to dismantle what remained and construct something new, something pure in its ambition, untainted by the weaknesses of the past. Alexis felt a chill spread through her, not just from the weight of his words, but from the part of her that recognized their truth. The Cassadines had been built on lies, betrayals, and power struggles that served no true purpose. She had spent years trying to distance herself from their influence, yet she had never truly escaped. The Cassadine name had always lingered over her, a specter that refused to let her go. Perhaps Sidwell was right. Perhaps the only way to free herself was not to run from the legacy, but to seize control of it and reshape it into something new. Sidwell stepped closer, his presence both mesmerizing and oppressive. His eyes burned with an intensity that sent a tremor through her, but it was not fear that coursed through her veins. It was something far more dangerous. A dark intrigue. A quiet understanding. He was not simply seeking revenge, he was crafting a future. And for the first time, Alexis saw an opportunity she had never considered before. She had always been on the outside, watching as the power games unfolded, resisting the pull of the Cassadine influence. But now, she stood at a crossroads. She could refuse him and become his enemy, knowing full well what that would mean. Or she could align herself with him, gain control over the chaos before it consumed her, and ensure that whatever came next, she would not be left behind. The fire crackled, filling the silence with a low, ominous hum. The walls of Wyndemere bore witness to centuries of deception and ambition, and now, they would witness something far greater. The fall of one empire and the birth of another. Alexis stood still, her mind racing with the implications of the path that lay before her. The decision was already made. The moment she had stepped into Wyndemere, the course of her fate had shifted. There was no turning back now. Alexis watched Sidwell in silence, her gaze unwavering as he continued to lay out his vision. He was not a delusional man driven by reckless ambition, he was a strategist, methodical and precise. He did not crave power for power's sake, he sought to dismantle the decaying legacy of the Cassadines and build something far greater in its place. A new dynasty, one that would not be shackled by the weaknesses of the past. His words were not the ramblings of a madman but the calculated declarations of someone who had spent years planning every step, every move, and every inevitable victory. There was something disturbingly compelling about the way he spoke. It was not just his confidence or the sheer audacity of his plan, but the way he articulated the failings of their so-called family, their corruption, their deceit, their endless cycles of betrayal that had long since rendered the Cassadine name meaningless. He did not simply want revenge, he wanted complete eradication of a dying empire so that he could raise a new one from its ashes. And as much as Alexis wanted to resist, to dismiss his claims as nothing more than the delusions of a bitter man, she found herself unable to do so. He was right. He spoke of the rot that had festered within the Cassadine name for decades. He laid bare the truth that she had always known but had never dared to acknowledge. The Cassadines were not a powerful dynasty anymore. They were a crumbling relic, propped up by the ghosts of the past and held together by fragile alliances that meant nothing. Their so-called influence was nothing more than an illusion, their reputation built on scandals, empty threats, and pointless power struggles that had long ceased to be relevant. Sidwell had evidence to prove it. He had uncovered the Cassadine dealings, the hidden betrayals, the countless instances where they had turned against one another for nothing more than fleeting control. He showed her documents, records of failed ventures, secret betrayals among their own ranks, the extent to which they had become puppets to their own downfall. He painted a picture so clear that Alexis could no longer deny what had always lingered beneath the surface. The Cassadines were no longer rulers, they were scavengers, clinging desperately to a throne that had long since crumbled beneath them. At first, Alexis hesitated. She had spent her life resisting the pull of Cassadine power, distancing herself from the toxicity of their influence. She prided herself on being different, on choosing a life outside of the endless game of manipulation and deceit. But now, as she stood in the very estate that once symbolized their dominance, listening to Sidwell's unshakable vision, she found herself questioning everything. For years, she had been an outsider looking in. She had watched others rise and fall, clawing for control while she remained on the sidelines, convinced that she was above it all. But had she truly freed herself? Or had she merely condemned herself to irrelevance, always lingering in the shadows of those who had no qualms about seizing power? Sidwell was offering her something that no one else ever had, a chance to be part of something new. Not a pawn in someone else's game, not a Cassadine in name alone, but a force to be reckoned with. He was offering her control, real control, over a future that was no longer dictated by the failures of those who had come before them. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she could no longer ignore the pull. If the Cassadines were destined to fall, why shouldn't she be the one to decide how it happened? Why shouldn't she stand at the forefront of a new era rather than watch it unfold from the shadows? She did not give Sidwell an answer that night. She walked away, her mind clouded with doubt and something far more dangerous, temptation. But as the days passed, the doubts faded, and the realization settled in. This was not just an opportunity. This was fate. A few days later, Alexis returned to Wyndemere. There was no hesitation in her steps, no trace of the woman who had once resisted the call of power. She had crossed a line that she could never step back from, but strangely, she felt no guilt. No fear. Perhaps, after all, she had never truly been the person she thought she was.